go. And good evening and welcome to day 3 of the 100 Days of Shakespeare event. I'm pretty happy that I've managed to do 3 days in a row. I'm pretty excited about that. I'm hoping, obviously, to do a lot more. Thanks for joining me if you're joining me, and if you're not joining me live, then I hope you enjoy the replay of this chat. So this evening, what I thought might be kind of interesting is to do a little bit of a brief history of English theatre as it led up to the Elizabethan period. So this is going to be fairly brief. It's a very general overview, so it's obviously not exhaustive. It won't cover absolutely every single type of English theatre in the lead up to the Elizabethan period. However, it will cover off the basic forms. These are by no means forms of theatre that are exclusive in a time period. So although there is a sequence, just like any kind of changing fashion, so whether that's clothes or music, or in this case, the style of theatre that the populace of that time were interested in and the style of theatre that was developing over the course of English history, these things overlap. And so as one becomes popularized and starts to push out into a new form, it might die off as something new is created and becomes the popular form of the day. And it's not to say that any of those older forms of theatre stopped being produced at all. We're still doing Shakespeare 400 years later, so we know some of this stuff would still continue to be produced, but they really did have a peak period when they were the kind of key theatre that was available on hand at the time. And so what I wanted to do was just go through just that brief history of English theatre, just to give us a little bit of an understanding of how English theatre came to be, what it was, and where it journeyed to on its way to becoming what we know as Shakespeare's work. I'm not going to go beyond that because this is about Shakespeare, so we're going to do leading up to Shakespeare till the Elizabethan period and leave it at that. So with that, let me grab a quick drink of water and jump in. So hopefully this works. Yes. All right. Better than my website list last night. So here we go. A little bit of an English theatre jaunt. Now, this is research that I did a number of years ago. If you know any further details and you want to share that, then you can do that either in the comments below, in the comments below. Whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, I'm live streaming this to both the Small Crown Productions Facebook page and the Small Crown Productions YouTube channel. So my plan is at the moment to go live at 9 p.m. every night for the next 100 days. And I will put a notice out if that is going to change, depending on work or life or whatever. But that is my plan currently, is to work through towards the end of the 100 days. So the first thing that we want to jump into is, where did it all start? So the first recorded piece of English theatre, according to my research, and again, if you know better, feel free to let me know in the comments, and I'm happy to be corrected. But from my research, the earliest recorded form of English theatre is actually attributed to something called the Quem Queritus trope. Now, a trope is a figure of speech. It's a word or a phrase interpolated as an embellishment. Just from dictionary.com, right? So a figure of speech, a word or phrase interpolated as an embellishment in the sung parts of certain medieval liturgies. So basically what happened was, from around 925 AD, the priests in the church were trying to find ways to keep people engaged, as priests in churches have been doing for as long as time memorial. And so what they decided to do was actually start acting out the Easter Mass and the Easter story. And so the Quem Queritus trope is named after the first couple of words of the actual trope. And so I'll just read this. The angel asks, "Quem quertus in sepulcro." Don't get me wrong for the don't hunt me down for the pronunciation. Which is, who do you seek in the sepulchre? So then the women reply, essentially Jesus of Nazareth, and then the angel replies again. And the priests acted this out as a means to visually represent the story of the Easter Mass, and it seemed to be quite popular. And so that obviously led to them doing more of this type of work. And I forgot, I had a little photo from a manuscript of some priests. So that, as the research says, said that they started doing more and more of that, and it reached a point where it became so popular that they had to move to the outdoors of the actual church. Now, this led to the next type of theatre. And again, as I said, this is super general. So this is just to give you a bit of an idea on some things that you can dig into. If you're interested in this, you can dig in a little bit further and learn, obviously research a little bit more around this yourself. This is super general. So the next type of theatre that led to is the mystery plays. Now, the mystery plays, I have a picture. There we go, pageant plays. So the mystery plays became popular. Essentially, they were liturgical dramas of the stories from the Bible. So liturgical being the Bible stories. So they basically ended up becoming a massive cycle of plays all around the Bible stories. And some of them led from the creation of the world, so from Genesis 1 right through to the story of the crucifixion, and sometimes right through after that to the returning of Christ as it's written. So there are records of some of these. There is, I think it's the York Mystery Cycle is the oldest surviving of the cycles, and it's recorded as being performed around 1376. It's got over 13,000 lines of text in the cycle, and it was broken down into 48 different plays, and so pageant plays. So this is the type of play that you would associate with those pageant wagons, the big 4 or 6 wheeled carts that were often 2 layered. So the bottom layer would have held the props and the costumes and all that kind of thing, and the upper level was where they performed. And these became more and more elaborate. They became more and more popular to the point where they didn't have enough people or funds to actually produce them. And so then the guilds started to get involved in the creation of the pageants. And so you had the Carpenters Guild helping fund and create the Noah story. You might have the Bakers Guild helping to fund and produce the Last Supper story. And so all of the guilds started to get involved, and it became, quite the thing for the guilds. So there are 4 main versions of the mystery cycles that we have records of, and they are the York, as I mentioned, the Closter, the Townie, and N-Town, the letter N-Town. The smallest of which I think is N-Town with about 11,000 lines. So it looks at Closter and Townie, about 11,000 lines each. So there was obviously more versions of this. Different locations would have had their own versions. But yeah, they're the 4 that we have. And the last performance of the York cycle in full was recorded in 1569. So went on for quite a while. So you can see there's 200 years of those things being performed there. So as I said, these styles, they overlap and they continue. The thing about the mystery plays is that they actually then started to get associated with the Corpus Christi feast and became an annual event, essentially. And so they developed in 2 ways. The most commonly known way is the pageant wagons that would pull in and the crowd could stay where they were, and the pageants would travel through the city streets. So they would stop at certain locations, and you as an audience member could then get to see every one of the stories as it came through. the other way is that the pageants would set up and the audience could move from play to play. A little bit less well known, but according to my research, definitely happened. Now, what are some of the records that we have? So we've got a little bit of information on the staging, and that's been derived from visual records of, paintings, wood carvings, sketches, that sort of thing, but also from things like civic records, guild records, that sort of thing. And so you've got records of pageant wagon repairs and costume repairs and those kinds of things. And the civic records and the guild records actually give you a little bit of an idea of the type of cost involved in running the pageants. So that was the mystery plays. They basically came out of the liturgical stories in the church, spilled out onto the street when they became bigger and more popular. And then that led to the next style, which is the miracle play. Now, the miracle play is, again, based in the church stories. Oh, boy. So the miracle plays were very much concerned with the miracles of the saints. And so the St. George plays, there is a number of St. George plays that you can still find records of. You can actually purchase books dedicated to early English theatre, and often you'll find 2, 3, sometimes 5 of the St. George plays or other miracle plays in there. So the difference being the mystery plays were very much focused on the stories of the Bible stories as they kind of laid out from creation through to resurrection. And the miracle plays were actually very much focused on the saints and the miracles that they did in order to become saints. And so all of this was really about trying to teach the church congregations and the public how to live, how to be a moral citizen, how to live life, and how to do life with some sort of morality around them. And so these recounting of these stories were seen as a way to inspire people to live better lives and more lives in the Christian kind of mindset. So the miracle plays went on for a while, and then out of the miracle plays came the morality plays. And we see the morality plays take theatre another step further away from the liturgy and the church stories, still very much based on the idea of encouraging and inspiring people to live a life of morals and to live a life of goodness and wholeness and to be a great human. And I got to say, these are some of my favorite early English plays. Mankind, Everyman, 2 of my favorite plays. There's another one that I can't remember the name of off the top of my head, but basically the morality plays took allegorical concepts and personified them as humans, as characters. So Everyman is a great example. And we actually did a play reading online of Everyman fairly recently. So I'll see if I can find a link for that, and I'll just make a note, link to Everyman. I'll see if we can find a link to that, and I'll pop that in the description below later. But the idea being that essentially, I mean, Everyman's a great example. So Everyman, being the representation of all humankind, wakes up or is visited by death, by the personification of death, the Grim Reaper type character that we would think of in modern terms. And death tells him that it's time to come. It's time. He's got to die. It's his time. And he fights back and says, I don't really want to go. It's not my time. And Death's like, no, it's definitely your time. And so he begs Death for an opportunity to find someone to come with him. And so he goes through all of the personification of things that he knows. Friends, family, and these are actually the names of the characters. And so he goes and sees a character named Friends, and a character named Family, a character named, maybe it's not family, mate, it's kindred and cousin, two characters. Good deeds, all of these things that you would think can be personified in the play, and they all reject him. They all tell him, yeah, we're here for you, and he's like, great, well, death's called and I have to go. I want you to come with me. And they all say no. And it's a representation of the fact that you cannot take anything with you when you die. Wealth is probably another one off the top of my head. So in the end, he's weary, he's dejected, he's depressed, he's upset, and the only one that will end up going with him at the end of the play, spoiler alert, is good deeds. And so it tells this story that it doesn't matter how much you have, it doesn't matter what you have, who you know, any of these other things. It only matters in the end the deeds that you've done, because they're the only thing that will go with you, and they're the only thing that you'll be remembered for. So amazing plays, written in early English, obviously, so you do have to do a little bit of deciphering, but absolutely love them. Some of my favorite plays, Everyman, Mankind, and there's a few others still around. So The Pride of Life, that's the other one. So definitely check those out if you've never read Everyman. Now, this isn't so much a style of theatre. It was more a kind of performance, I don't know how to explain it, but essentially the records indicate that mumming, and this is not to be associated with the mummers' plays of the 17th century, for a period of time in the 1400s through to the early 1500s, and I think so 1511. So 1418, 1479, and 1511, mumming was banned on an issue of public safety. So keep that in mind. So basically, the records indicate that mumming was a processional visitation to a private house or some kind of superior in society. So it was often something that you would do to visit the upper class, and there are some amazing records of this happening. And the mummers would go in, and they would be masked or in costume, and they would often kind of do like some kind of bet or play some game with the person that they were visiting and deliberately lose. So the goal was that they would go dressed in these costumes, play a game or have some kind of interaction with the upper class person, the host, the aristocrat, whoever it was, lose the game, and present them with a prize, which essentially was a gift. So it was a really interesting way for them to bestow gifts on people. And I'll just read a little bit here. So the earliest full description of mumming is by John Stowe in a survey of London, and it tells of 130 people who rode in costume to the palace of Richard II at Kensington in 1371. So 1371, and it was banned in 1511. So again, another 150 odd years that this is happening. So once they played dice with the young king, making sure that he won 2 of the 3 games, he won 3 jewels as a prize. So they made sure that they lost and that he won, and they gave him a prize of 3 jewels. So the entertainment ended with music and dancing, and this is what it was. It was this kind of sort of visitation procession type thing. There is an account of a mummer's account, essentially, in a French court in 1393, where a group of mummers went in dressed as wild men. Now, if you've ever seen a reference to mummers, you may have seen like a wood carving or a sketch or a drawing of essentially what looks like a man in like one of those, I don't know, they're called ghillie suits, like that they would go hunting in now. So it's like strips of fabric. So the account is that this one was actually hair, and they were dressed as wild men covered in hair, and one of them caught fire, and all of them but one died and got burnt to death in this French court. So definitely something that you needed to be careful with. But a really interesting kind of performance style of visitation that came out of the English theatre as it developed. So a little bit of an off-track thing there, but not really a play as such, but definitely playing and performing in a way which kind of gave people access to the upper class. Now, there's no records that I've found about who they were. Were they lower class citizens coming and finding? I mean, if they're giving jewels as a gift, I suspect, records would kind of, the evidence would show that they're probably other aristocrats or other rich people finding a way to give gifts. But I can imagine all sorts of ways this would have been used to, potentially visit young ladies and, visit friends that you maybe, haven't been able to see. So anyway, a really fascinating thing that came out of the English theatre. So that leads us to the next type of play. So as plays developed and got longer and more detailed, something called an interlude started to form. Now, the interlude was essentially like the comic relief. So they were short, witty, mostly farcical stories that were inserted between scenes of longer plays. And so it was a way to break the audience out of the story that was happening in the play. Sorry. Mumming. Oh, there you go. So there's some mummers in character and costume there. So this is from a woodcut from 1400 something. Interludes. So the interlude, so it was a short farcical piece of theatre that was inserted into longer plays. And so over time, as English theatre became more entrenched in the secular world and became less and less involved in biblical stories and liturgical recounting of the Bible and Christian life, it took on a life of its own, because not everybody wants to hear stories about that. And so then, it inspired other playwrights to come forth, and then we start to get the early English theatre, which are the early kind of long-form plays that were all in those sort of couple hundred years before Elizabethan theatre. And so the interlude dropped into these longer-form plays. So they would be that break in the thinking. Obviously, I've just come full circle because I mentioned that before. So, so there's a few records of them, and they were pretty prominent around the sort of mid to late 1400s, right through into the sort of early to mid 1500s. Still happening right up through into the period where Shakespeare would have started writing. And I think, when you think about the commonality of things like, what are they called? Jigs to end Elizabethan plays, and the comedy that was built into some of the scenes, I think we can start to see an understanding of the response to the audience response. So these interludes would have been written to help give the audience a break from the main story, because they would have seen that the audiences were becoming restless and less attentive. And so they would have found a way to counter that by adding in these interludes. Now, these interludes then obviously shape some of the early forms of the Elizabethan comedy, and we start to see from that sort of farcical interlude, rather than it being an interlude, we start to see that in those later plays being basically written into the plays, and those comedic characters really stepping forth and really becoming quite prominent. So, that's about it. So those interludes continued right through. And so obviously the liturgical plays started to die off. I mean, they were still around, obviously, but secular writing started to become more and more popular. And of course, the church didn't like that, which led to the church looking to have interludes banned and other secular types of plays banned at various times, which led in time to the Master of the Revels being created, and the revel, the Office of the Revels being created, so that they could control the types of theatre that the public were seeing. And it was around that period in the I don't have the note in front of me actually, but it was after the church had basically gotten interludes and that sort of thing banned a few times, they essentially managed to get theatre houses pushed outside the city limits. And that's when we start to see things like the Globe, start to see the Globe and the Curtain and the Rose all starting to be built outside of the city limits. And that happened because the church essentially banned or got the theatres banned within the city limits, because it was a way for the church to maintain some control. So, so that's when we then lead into the sort of mid 1500s and start to see the Elizabethan form start to really take shape. Obviously, Marlowe was writing just before Shakespeare was really prominent. Marlowe was writing iambic pentameter before Shakespeare and did a great job of it as well. And you look through some of his work and start to see the way that he was writing, and you can really see, I think, Shakespeare taking that mantle and running with it. And obviously, Marlowe met an early end. I think had he not, it would have been very interesting to see what kind of rivalry would have developed in the longer term between those two writers had Marlowe not met that demise. So there you go. Not touching on Elizabethan theatre tonight. Wanted to really just touch on, and that there's my picture of some early Renaissance players. Just wanted to really touch on the English form and a little bit around that, and just kind of go on that journey through that process of where English theatre came from. And when you start to see those pieces come together, there are some things in the Renaissance, in the Elizabethan sort of period, that you kind of get a sense of, you can see where that came from. So hope that was of use to you. If that was something that you'd like information on, a little bit more info on, drop a comment down below. Very, very fast general overview of English theatre. Head over to the 100 Days of Shakespeare event on Facebook and jump into the group, which I will link in the description below. Of course, while you're here, feel free to give this video a like and subscribe to the Small Crown Productions channel, and tell your friends we're looking at Shakespeare for 100 days. Let's do it together. That'll be great. Thanks very much. I'll